A couple of times over the coffee break, somebody came up to me and asked me about lead measures, any practical experience about lead measures. A good example would be a utility company in the UK. They basically had two items in the appraisal that were about safety specifically. They were very proud of this and thought they were ever so leading edge. One of them looked at LTI rate, and the LTI rate is tiny, so there was no discrimination there whatsoever, really. And the second one looked at the number of walk and talks, you might call it felt leadership or Sousa's stop approach and so on. And what they found was, because they didn't cross-reference that with quality, what they found was they got lots of crap ones at the end of the month. And we suggested that maybe what you want to do is to cross-reference the number of walk and talks with the quality of walk and talks. Yeah, and for me, the absolute best leading measure that I know of is how many high-impact, low-cost solutions to problems do you get when you have these conversations with the workforce or you set up analysis teams. Because if you're getting a lot of those, or even high-impact, high-cost solutions, you can't be going far wrong. Training is a really good example, A lot of companies have a leading measure that looks at the number of people trained relative to the number of people planned to be trained. And you get a lovely pie chart that says it's gone from 60% compliance to 90%, so that's only a quarter as few not trained. But, there's all sorts of questions that begs. How well were they trained? How well did we follow up the training to make sure those behaviors embedded? Do those behaviors give us something different? And if it is something different, is it something different and better, or is it something different and just different? So there's all sorts of digging, I think, that can be done. And two very quick points in terms of unintended consequences, talking to Sydney over coffee. Did you know that if you wear a cycle helmet, lorry drivers drive 20% closer to you than if you haven't got your helmet on? Is true. I don't know, complex systems and about unintended consequences, there's lots, but that's one that I thought was particularly pertinent. And finally, the issue of unease. I don't know how many of you have read Malcolm Gladwell's book on Blink, on, system one thinking in Kahneman's terms, I think, isn't it? And what he says is, if you, to take an example, you walk into a pub that you've never been to before, how long does it take you to work out, this is a bit dodgy in here? Literally, how long does it take? Seconds? You can't articulate why, you just know you don't feel comfortable. And the point that Gladwell makes, and I think it's a point that generalizes to all sorts of work, is if you don't try and work out why you feel uneasy while standing near the door, you're a bloody idiot. And on that note, I'll hand over to my colleagues. Over to you, John.
Thank you, Tim.
Yeah, it was when you said about targets, this thought came to my mind, civil engineers build targets, mechanical engineers knock them over. We're just going to sort of take a slight excursion off to the left here. Something Sydney didn't cover but in his talk, but is well written up in his books. And really, Sydney, we know that hindsight is a huge obstacle to learning from failure. And often this hindsight stuff leads to unexpected, unjust reactions. Can you talk a bit more about this?
Yeah, but briefly, but it's a foundational thing to understand. John likes to speak in terms of the biases and the things that we introduce when we think about the world. Well, that goes for us as well when we look at how other people perform. When we look at something that they did and we already know the outcome, then we look very differently at that than they looked at the situation at the time because they didn't know the outcome. All right? This is known as the hindsight and outcome bias, and it's very important to understand that as soon as you know the outcome, your assessment of the performance that led up to it changes dramatically. Richard Cook, a colleague of mine in healthcare, has drawn this up really beautifully. Right? After the accident, we come in, the analyst, the safety person, the prosecutor, the regulator perhaps, and they say, look, you should have zigged, but you zagged. All right? Because after the accident, it becomes so easy to convert this grand complexity where there were all kinds of ways to let things go wrong, all kinds of pitfalls and risks, all kinds of decisions to be taken. It becomes so easy, once we know the outcome, to go to the last decision that allowed it to happen and say, look, if only you had done this, if only you had done that. Now, I'm not going to get into the basic psychology of why this is a very sensible bias when we want to learn, but for us, it is important to understand that if you want to work on prevention, you have to make sure that you understand why it makes sense for people to do what they do. All right, this is the local rationality principle that John didn't talk about. But people don't come to work to do a bad job. All right, we have to assume that. If they do come to work to do a bad job, you're in the territory of sabotage, right? And that's not human factors, all right? People come to work to do a good job. If that's true, and what they do leads to trouble, then you really have to understand why it made sense for them to do what they did. Because if it makes sense for them, it will make sense for the next person. You can still fire and sanction the person who screwed up, but nothing will change if the conditions are left in place that allow that person to see that action as the most sensible to take. All right? So the hindsight bias is avoided if you try to understand what was in their mind at the time. And this takes hard analytical work on your part. What were the various decisions that you were facing? What were the things that you were going to run into? What trouble did you foresee? All right? Don't ask people, how could you have avoided this? Because after the outcome, they know that too. Oh, I should have zigged instead of zagged. Okay, good. Now we've all learned. No, you've learned nothing. All right? Absolutely nothing of value. So don't ask that question. How could this not have happened? Please. I mean, really, please. All right? Why did it make sense for you to do what you did? That's the question to ask. Because if you don't understand that, next day, somebody else will see that as the most sensible thing again. All right? Thanks, Joe.
Okay. So, I think we ought to wait a few minutes because I'm sure that later on Sydney will actually let us know what he really thinks.
Now, I'll be a good boy. No, I won't be.
No. Shocking. The question there, so at your tables, a little exercise, if you would. For those of you who reckon you've got enough knowledge of what went on if you read the reports about Macondo, just think, well, what Sydney just said, which were they actually bad decisions? Could you explain them in terms of local rationality? But for those of you who don't have that familiarity, because this is a health and safety community, at your tables, if any of you can think of an incident where the first reaction was, how could he have been so stupid? What a dumb thing to do. If you can think up an incident like that and just talk amongst yourselves for 5-10 minutes or so, and because what we'll do is probably pick a couple of tables at random, so you've all got to do the job, and just say, we saw these dumb and stupid things, and yet perhaps the reason they did these things, what made sense to them at the time, the reason they carried on doing it was. So it's almost like look at an incident which was particularly dumb and then try and invent a story that to the people involved seemed reasonable. You have 2
minutes.
10 minutes.
10? No, God, no.
Oh, 5.
I have more to say, man. 2 minutes.
No, 5. 3.
I'll 5 minutes. Okay, what we want is for people to volunteer, to jump up and throw in their own contributions, their war stories, their thoughts, their objections, their views. I'll kick off a story that comes to mind. For me, I did a session for a senior management team of a large mining company in the UK once, about 4 or 5 years ago. And we went through just culture, and we went through hindsight bias, and we really broke down a few case studies that they'd been through themselves. And the managing director the next day came in and said, you should know, I drove to a guy's house last night, gave him his job back. Now, I sacked him 3 years ago, but I gave him his job back because when I actually look back at the situation, I thought, oh my God, what have I done? So here's a little war story from me. A volunteer from the audience, please. I wonder if you could drop the lights up the lights a bit so we can see these guys.
Don't worry about volunteers. Here's one. What's your name? Who do you work for? And what's the answer to the question? And the mic is hot.
I've forgotten the first one I meant to say. Mark Wallace works for Maersk, and the answer to the question is leadership and clarity in the job for our event.
leadership and clarity in the job. All right, what is leadership in this case?
Leadership is showing the way. It's motivating, facilitating people to do the right thing.
Does this lead to an answer to the question that you asked, John? Or thank you, thank you.
How could they have been so dumb? Was it the absence of leadership?
Was it the absence of leadership? What did your table come up with?
We talked about an incident where a guy got trapped between two containers in a lifting incident. He was standing in the wrong place. How could he be so dumb? The crane operator couldn't see him. How could he be so dumb? The load handler who should have warned him didn't say a word. The crane lift went ahead. The guy got seriously injured. They were lifting in the dark because somebody had removed the lights. Why did they do all that? Because they were under time pressure to get a job finished so the vessel could sail.
Would it be possible for another team to get into the same situation? Because that really is the question.
Would it be possible for that to happen again?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So it wasn't unique. This is not about unsafe people being born and in the wrong place. Unsafe people are made.
These were trained, qualified people
Yeah.
who reacted in a given circumstance.
John?
Very good answer. Yes. Any more volunteers who would like to speak?
You'll be real volunteers now. I will quit. Sorry.
Any volunteers from this side?
With a story to tell, surely. We gave you 7 minutes to talk.
And there was a lot of talking.
There was.
Gentleman in the back, and it was animated and it was intense. And
Oh, okay, yep. And then
we'll come to you. Yeah.
Okay. When I analyzed Macondo, one of the things that struck me is I had a déjà vu from when I was working on an exploration rig. At the end of a well, so when you're finally packing up, 90% of your time is spent on the next well. You're preparing for the next well. You're trying to figure out, you offload mud, you offload equipment, the rig has to move. You need to be prepared for the next one. So I don't think the people were dumb. I think they just had lost the sense of vulnerability. They weren't focused on that operation anymore. They were focused on the safety meeting that they were having, and they were focused on the next well rather than the well that they were completing.
So certainly distraction probably could be an explanation, could be a valid story for effectively losing the plot.
Yeah, I think after you've cemented that liner, you get this sense of it's behind us.
So good, yeah.
And that sense of vulnerability drops then.
Yeah.
How could you change that?
I would need to think about that.
Yeah. No, I mean, if there was an easy answer, then everybody would have invented it. I mean, this is hard, right?
Yeah.
And just as John said, just telling people to be chronically uneasy, I mean, in psychology, chronic unease is diagnosable, right? We have drugs against that, you know? So it's not very operationalizable, right? Another word that John used. And so how do you instill a sense of continued vulnerability, right? Don't turn your back. And in flight training, we always say you land the airplane, but the landing, you're not done driving the thing, right? So, but
I think one of the things is what discussions are you having with the beach? I remember again from my own rig experience, 90% of the telephone calls about the next well, not the operation that you're currently drilling. And the beach has a role to play there and say, let's stay focused on what we're doing today first.
good point.
Yeah, so not only is it distraction, but the blunt end is applying pressure to the sharp end as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. To focus on the next thing. Yeah.
Okay, can I jump in with an answer? I mean, you know, some of the reading I've done suggests a devil's advocate.
Yeah.
You know this problem's going to come up, so what you do is you put a monitor evaluator, devil's advocate in to make sure that doesn't cause any
Ask
problems.
all the questions you don't want to hear.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Interesting.
There's a gentleman there.
Thanks.
Yes, my name is Michael Jørgensen. I'm from CO Industry, which is a trade union. But I had an example of a dumb guy, or perhaps not dumb. I think he's a very good worker with all the best intentions, because he worked at a plastic manufacturer, and something got stuck in the production line, and they have been told that whenever that happened, they have to stop the machinery, and when they did that, it has to take 4 or 6 hours to restart it because everything had to be cleansed so they could start again producing. And he had earlier, when such thing happened, put his hand in and got the thing out that got stuck. This time he was unfortunate. He didn't get his arms out. Instead, he was pulled into the machine and killed. And of course, that's a dumb thing, but he did it in all the best intentions. And as we talked about, it was something about clear instructions. Well, you have to stop it, but it's very expensive when you do it. And as we said, last year we were told whenever but goes into a sentence, you nullify it, whatever came first. And then the most important thing is it's expensive. And that's why I think he was a good worker, an unfortunate good worker.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think a lot of accidents happens because they have all the best intentions in loyalty to the company. They think it's in the best interest of the company, and that's why they take these risks.
That's a beautiful example.
Yes, I mean, everything before the but is bullshit.
You are so British.
No. It's 40 years in the
no
oil
idea what that
field.
means, even, right? What does it even mean? But I love you too.
I think that that is an exceptionally valuable story because
that I agree with.
forget me, because it shows that we actually create our own pressures. And to a certain extent, anybody who sat on one of these 6th-generation rigs, sitting looking at the burn rate of $1.2, $1.5 million a day, you don't have to have pressure on the beach. If you are behind the curve, it's something that the team will impose upon itself. And I think that was really where the work that Dong are doing in driving these leadership behaviors, if it causes pause for thought and people are aware of these pressures and the supervisor, sorry, the company man, know what they call it. Anyway.
Well, let me ask, okay, so on the back of this story, let me add, because you may have other examples. So this is my definition of safety culture that allows the boss to hear bad news, okay? Now, that's all really cute, but if that were really working in your case, then that machine wouldn't be part of your process anymore, right? Let me give you another example that...
How do you mean? Wouldn't be?
All right, supervisors, you're in charge. By the way, I think that the supervisor is standing right there, leaning against the cardboard boxes. Right? Good job, boys. Thanks for getting the load up the balcony. Well done. Tomorrow, we will try a heavier load. Right? And this is how you drift into failure. But if this is the case, gang, and if that's a rather typical example, because I agree with John, this is not only a good story, I think it is unfortunately quite typical. Are you in the business of rewarding the wrong stuff? Are you configured in organizations that reward ultimately the wrong stuff? Where are the mics? Oh man, no volunteers.
Okay, I'll jump in with a story. I did some work with a large department store in the UK, and the head of safety resigned one day, and the reason he resigned was because 2 guys were given an award for getting a sofa, a really heavy sofa, to the top floor of a block of flats.
Interesting.
And he said, if you reward them for that, I'm off.
Good on him.
Because the management had said, absolutely fantastic job, boys, wonderful. Don't even want to know how you did it. And you don't want to know how they did it.
35. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah. Oh, good.
Please, a question, a comment, a story? Over there.
My name is Erik Larsen from Maersk Drilling, and I think I have at least my point of view on the question whether we are rewarding the wrong things. And I think we probably, as many other organizations, suffer from what I call KPI pollution.
KPI pollution.
We have tons of KPIs. And that in many cases actually leads to the fact that our leaders, they are managing instead of leading. Because they are sitting behind their desks, operating tons and tons of pieces of paper, instead of being out there seeing things like that, stopping the guy from being pulled into the machine. And me from headquarters, I'm as responsible as anybody else because we send out millions of emails, millions of questionnaires, instead of telling the guy, go to the deck, we should be measuring the ORM on how many hours he spent on the deck every day instead of answering reports or writing a permit to works or whatever it is. They should be out leading. And my definition of leadership is pretty simple. It's standing in front of the guys. You cannot lead from behind, you can only lead from in front of your guys. So you should be spending times out there, and that is probably why we are suffering from KPI pollution and are managing our people instead of leading them.
A recent study from, and again, I'm not putting feathers in anybody's hats for anything other than sharing the data with you, about 10,000 data points in the offshore industry in Norway, NTNU data, shows that there is a very clear distinction between, this is just published in Safety Science, very clear distinctions in organizations that have this frontline supervisor and managerial presence and those that don't. All right? And if you do count the negatives and think that's an interesting measure, it actually shows up. Right? So there seems to be very little substitute for being out there. Right? And so I've had some organizations, Tim, you must have seen those too, that institute meeting-free and Excel sheet-free mornings or something, right? And they walk around. And they don't do it in clumps, because walking around in a clump is not very smart. Right? And so, and when you walk around, be inquisitive. Ask, what's dodgy, right? What's dangerous about what you're doing? What's your arm doing in that thing, right?
No, absolutely. I mean, there's some interesting data from America. Like came out last year before last. The more walk and talks you do, the safer you are.
Right, so it's consistent with the data, yeah.
The more varied the people out there doing the walk and talks, the safer you are, because they're out from head office and so on. And the finance guys are out there looking at production. And some other interesting stuff, the more repeat items you find, the less safe you are. Because you're not getting them closed out, you're not learning.
Yeah.
You know, so it's some interesting stuff.
I have sometimes thought that one of the best things we could do as an industry is just abandon safety departments altogether. None of you should have a safety department. No HSE managers. Fire them. Get rid of them. Right? Because it seems to suggest that safety is under control by these groups, which is the bloodiest nonsense ever said in this industry. It isn't. What they do is they compile data in Excel sheets for you, right? Which, and again, data about mostly irrelevant stuff. So, yes, you're probably worthy of your job. Sorry, but but to send a very strong message to say that safety is between the supervisor and the work, right? Well, and throughout the organization, obviously. But to think that you can have a corporate function somewhere that takes care of that for you, perhaps gives other people the impression that they don't need to worry about it. But they do.
Yeah, and in talking about people factors, some of the best organizations don't have human resource departments either.
Is that true?
That's true.
That is a very cool piece of data.
It is.
Did you hear that? Wow, yeah. That's good, that's good.
Yeah. Well, it's the most valuable asset. It needs to be managed properly.
So why do you give it to a
graduate with anyway, moving on.
No, it's good. You had a question for me.
Oh, a challenge. I thought I'd put Sydney on the spot if I could. I was saying that, you know, in his talk, he said, you're all fraudulent. And I said, that's a bit judgmental, isn't it? Isn't that an entire contradiction of the thing that you just said? About you don't do these things deliberately, you do them inadvertently. So that's my challenge to Sydney. He said, share that with the audience. He said, I'll give it my best shot.
Thanks, Tim. I think that's this is what colleagues among each other should do, right? Peers saying, no, that doesn't work. Boom, right? Iron sharpening iron. So thank you. What Tim is saying, and I think he's absolutely right, is for me to call you a bunch of frauds is judgmental. Well, duh. But not only is it that, it actually runs completely counter everything I stand for and write. And I've just been saying, we have to understand why it makes sense for you to do what you're doing, all right? And rather than saying, oh, you're committing fraud, I think all of you know that having a guy in a hospital bed with a computer so that he doesn't become an LTI is not entirely ethical, right? And there's really playing with the numbers, and there's many other things that you probably do to achieve the low numbers. I think the question that we need to face, and so I thank Tim for challenging me on this, is why does it make sense for you in the industry to keep doing this? Why does it make sense? How are you held accountable? What makes you look good, right? What makes you look bad? How do you keep your job? How do you lose your job? How do you make the next career step, right? Not by going from 0 LTIs to 10 LTIs. Even though it's statistical noise, given the man hours your organization probably produces. Right? Okay, I'm still talking. Why does it make sense to you to keep doing this? Enlighten me. Yeah. People are constantly struggling for results. We're back in the KPI, contamination, pollution.
I think we're tending to lose sight of accountability. That's as an employee and also as leaders. Employees also have an accountability over for their own workplace, their own colleagues. Leaders have an accountability in the fact that if you have to stop a machine to prevent a guy getting his arm caught, yes, it's going to cost you money.
Yeah.
But what's going to be the cost if you lose a life? The damage to your reputation?
Oh, but you just tell them to watch out a little more carefully. You write an extra procedure, put a sign on it, watch out, you know.
But again, you're driven by results.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
Thanks.
There's a chap there with a question, comment.
Maybe it's also a thing you have to think about the profits of your business, and I think it's also important to think new solutions of how you do things. Leadership may also be to allow employees to come with proposals to do things in a smarter way.
Well, but who gets to define smarter? Because this is where I think Jim had a fantastic point, right? Remember the early talk, all right, in this wacky Scottish? But it was brilliant, because what was there? It said procedures are designed from the bottom up, right? And yet, there's various stages of vetting and checking and technical compliance and everything, but they start at the bottom and they end at the bottom, because if the guys at the coalface are not going to sign off on how this work is going to be done, it's not going to be the procedure. Have I understood that correct? Thank you. And I think, Jim, again, this is the example that I would hope all of you follow. Right? In the airline industry, it's very common because pilots run airlines, basically, right? So they're always writing their own stuff. But for you, that's why I want to challenge smarter. Says who? According to whom? And according to which criteria? Right?
Be sure, accidents will always happen. Always,
yeah,
no matter what you do, they will always happen. The question is only, how often will they happen?
No. That's not the question. The question that you guys are always asking is, will it happen to me or to my neighbor? Yeah. Right? Schadenfreude. Oh, it's these Yanks. Fair enough.
Can I come back on that? If accidents are inevitable, how is it that every single accident that there's ever been, with the benefit of hindsight, you can find a very simple way of stopping?
Why do we even investigate them then, if they are so inevitable? If they really are accidental, why do we spend tens of millions of dollars on investigations? Apparently, we think that there's something to learn, that they're not entirely inevitable. Right?
No, it's not necessarily learning, of course.
This is true.
Comes into who draws the line in the just culture, because after all, you've got the legal and the prosecutors and the compensation. You've got a huge industry out there which is designed to swing into action when
to divvy up the cash afterwards.
To divvy up the cash to the survivors. Yeah. And this really is where the just culture really hits a roadblock, because it's he who has the money, makes the decisions, has the power to draw the line. And I think this is what we're seeing in Macondo, particularly.
Where the two engineers are being prosecuted?
Where the two engineers are being prosecuted, where the geologist who is accused of covering up flow rates is being prosecuted, but above all, the company is being prosecuted. And of course, now everybody's disappeared behind, they put up their photon shields and their defensive shields. And of course, the real casualty is now going to be, well, what is the real truth? And if there are some of us who believe the real truth is, how do you get organizations sensitive to responding to weak signals decisively, then this industry is going just about the right way it can possibly do to kill this thing off.
In one of the books, I wrote that in the wake of an accident like this, there is no truth, only versions, right? And the question is, whose version gets to rule the roost? Whose version reigns supreme at the end? And as John indicates, it's often the version of the people with significant resources, right? And individual engineers may lose, very tragically so. I think that is extremely harmful for a just culture, for a learning culture, for a safety culture, right? It shuts. If I were an engineer and I see my colleagues being prosecuted, man, I'm not going to tell bad news to my boss. In an email? No way. I have a track record to be prosecuted on? I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, a perfect example of that are those of you familiar with Hillsborough. You know, just this year, we've actually got to the truth of Hillsborough and the cover-ups and the incompetence and all the rest of it. So there was...
And that's how long? 30 years?
20 years. 23 years, specifically.
Yeah.
For the truth to come out. But people tried very hard to write their own version of it for a while. Questions, please, comments. You know, we really want you to have your say and direct this debate the way you want it. Just Jim, there's a couple there. Oh, we're doing well. There's 1, 2, 3 for the... I think we come to Jim last because you've had a shout already, Jim. There's a guy at that table and a guy at that table.
I would like to start first. You asked what leadership is.
Who are you?
My name is Ben Nielsen. I'm from Svitzer. I used to work for Maersk Drilling for many years. My colleague and I, we just discussed it here earlier. Do you know what leadership is? I know it because I'm being poisoned by it every day. Especially this
poisoned by it.
Yeah, my wife every day when she stands in the kitchen window and look out at the garden and say, it really needs a good go over, doesn't it? That's called leadership because then she knows I will pick up the shovel and go out there.
Are you still married?
Yes, happily.
Yeah, sounds like it, yeah. How's the garden doing, by the way?
Another thing is, in Denmark, I don't know how it is where you're coming from in Australia because you stand on your heads, but compared to us, that's most probably why you are as you are. The best managers we have...
I'm not from there.
No, I can hear that. The best managers we have in Denmark, do you know who they are?
Women.
No.
Surely.
They're the garbage collectors. Because if you don't get the garbage bin right every Monday morning when they pick it up, they won't pick it up next week. I guess everybody from Denmark, they can agree with that, can't they? Because if you don't do exactly what they want, they're not going to pick it up next week. And then you are in the, you know what I mean?
So it's compliance by bullying.
We had a reflection on the deep sea horizon. And I firmly believe that nobody goes out and get killed by, just by somebody tells them to do the job, whatever they want the job to be done. We had it last year, and I always thought that the experience was a vital part of being able to survive in the industry we are in. But one of the guys we killed last year, we're good at that. He was 68 years of age, and when he left in the morning to go out and do a job, he didn't do it. When he said goodbye to his wife, I'm sure that he expected to go home and ask what for dinner tonight. He didn't. He never came home. What I'm thinking is that on the management side, what we are not good at, well, leadership or management, whichever way you want it, we are definitely not good at defining what it is we actually want them to do. We are even worse at telling them how to do it. And I like the one with the KPI poisoning because that's what it is, pollution. And I think what we need is that all of us HSEQ managers here, we are measured on the historical data from last year or the last month. What we need to look at also, what we do when we write tenders and so on, we don't even stick it in anymore. We write about all the good stuff we can do.
Good, that's very good.
Because that's what you need to do. You don't need to talk about what happened yesterday. You can't change it.
But did that take a lot of courage on you as an organization?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't.
And you haven't lost contracts as a result of that?
Actually, won 3 out of 4, so it's not too bad.
Excellent. No, but that's good. That's a great example.
But I think it's important that we get that under the skin as HSEQ managers. We need to focus on that we can do positive stuff for our people, for our employees, and the ones out in the deep end, because when you get your first kid, the first 5 years they have to, the learning curve is going like this. And I think when we get new people in the offshore business, that's exactly the same. We have to nurse them. They have to have a green hat. Then they get a yellow hat. And whenever they get really good at it, they get a white hat. That's when you have to start care a little bit about it, because then the self-confidence kicks in. And that is a dangerous period, because you have 15, 20 years where that is the biggest fear factor for us, that we actually can lose them in that period. So and then they start thinking about the pension, and then they get cautious again. And, well, I'm sorry, but that's the way I see it. I think a lot of people can agree to this. Because when you get to my age, and I can see we have a lot of gray hair around here, we start thinking about, shit, we have paid for the pension for the past 30 years, we want to have it now, right?
Not give it to the wife who stands there bitching about your garden.
No. We've done the garden work.
But, so here's a question to Tim on the back of what you were saying, which is, okay, because I'm hearing a lot about systems, processes, structures in place to help your people do the right thing, right?
That's fine.
It seems as if leadership and safety leadership in your company seems to focus more, less on preventing people from doing the wrong thing and more on providing them the opportunity, the tools, the capabilities to do the right thing.
I think we have educated them enough, and I think that they should be capable of walking the talk themselves.
Yep, but
without that I, as I'm a Marine Standard Manager, but I shouldn't be the one telling them how to act safely.
You've told your wife this too, right?
Exactly.
Unsuccessfully so.
No, but I think I've seen Tim Mars a few times, and I've also seen the models he's rotating, where your mind is actually focusing on what you're doing and how you do it, and what you see is actually what you believe is right. I never forget that ballerina that turns around when you close your eyes. And I think that's a perfect example, because the people we send out, if we hurt them, or if they get killed, I'm sure they didn't do it on purpose.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, my name is Flemming Horn Nielsen with Dong E&P. First, a couple of comments and then a question. And I'm happy to see your faces turning this way in the audience. This is where all the pretty people are sitting, so that's good. First, I was somewhat provoked by the fact that we were saying that the accidents do happen. I just want to remind everyone the name of this is Task Force Zero. And the name of that was made because we were supposed to tell each other and convince each other that accident can be avoided, all of them. So just to make sure, that's why we have the name Task Force Zero. First comment.
It's an ideology. It's not very practical.
No.
Sure.
Second
keep believing.
I'm proud to be a board member of Oil Gas Denmark, and I just want to make a comment, and I think it's very good that Oil Gas Denmark is continuing to host these events, and I think they've done a great effort, and I just would like you to give a short applause to the few people Oil Gas Denmark who made a lot of work this time. Please do so. Yeah. They are a small, very hard-working group doing a lot for the industry, and of any companies who wish to become a member who's not a member, I think you really should join. This is one of the things, ACC, that Oil Gas Denmark would really do a lot of efforts within. Now, to the question. There's been a...
There is one.
Yeah, there is one. A few of the speakers I've noticed have made a few comments on the fact that senior management have a perception of things being much better within HSE than they are really. And I would like to have a few comments on, do you see that as well? Why do you think that is happening? Because I think it's bad. And what can we do about it?
Interesting. So about the perception gap.
Isn't it the question is the monkeys sitting in the tree?
I have no idea what you're
Because they're sitting at the top. And you look at all these smiling, you look down and see all these smiling faces, but if you're at the bottom...
See these Cambridge-educated people, right? Good.
Can you share that, John, a bit?
Sorry, I did share it. I was sorry, I was pointing.
No, we're waiting for answers.
I thought the mic was on. I don't have to say it again.
No, but just to repeat.
Expand.
Are you talking now? No, it's a fact.
No, if I can.
No, I was just going to repeat the question because everybody looks stunned. Is it what? The pretty corner? No, but the question is this perception gap, right, from the top where the monkey sits in the tree, apparently in Cambridge, down. There's monkeys in Cambridge. Oh,
yeah, lots of them.
Lots of them, yeah. They were academic suits, yeah. Monkey suits. Tim, take over. Never mind. I'll sit down and never mind.
I'll answer the question. I'll answer the question. Because the closer you are to the action, the more accurate your interpretation of what's going on.
Right.
And the whole point of all this is to close that gap by being proactive in the way that you investigate and objective in your investigation style, I would argue. Yeah.
And we're back to the earlier remarks from the non-pretty corner, apparently.
Yeah.
Where,
the ugly people.
Well, that's his words, not mine.
Yeah. So we need behavioural root cause analysis teams from the front line. We need safety leadership walk and talks where the first question is why. And proactive questions like, is there anything slow or uncomfortable about doing this job safely? Because we know that's a problem, if the answer to that is yes. And all that, that's to try and answer it sensibly. Now, we can just insult these people a bit more now, could we?
No, you go ahead.
But it is definitely one of its sensitivity to operations, and that's the essence of a high reliability organisation. It's point number 3, and it is the leaders are intimately familiar with the way the operation's functioning. And when you look at successful generals, when you look at Admiral Rickover and the impression he made on the US nuclear program, he knew what was going on right at the bottom.
Absolutely.
But in that case, I think we deserve a few suggestions, if you're all so smart, how to stop this.
Well, we haven't come to Jim yet. Jim's been waiting very patiently.
Oh, he knows how to stop this too. He has. Yeah, let's go to Jim first.
My point was all about just cultures. A long time ago, in a land far, far away, I had to investigate a very serious incident. So this was a former Soviet country. They had their own rules, and I broke a lot of rules involved not the committee, but some members of the workforce. I assured them it would look right down the systems and we would get to root causes. So when I concluded the investigation, the government says, that's fine. You've only got one more thing to do. I want you to ascribe blame to the company, to the management, and to the injured person proportionally. They felt that that was a just culture.
Yeah.
Right? Because if the company were to blame, the guy's pension would be okay. So my point is that your definition of a just culture depends on the values of the culture that you currently think that you are in.
In Doha, that's a very simple. We have a just culture. We just fire them.
Yeah, there you go. That's what I mean. Who defines just?
Absolutely.
That's my point.
Do you want an answer to that, though, Jim?
If you have one. I've found that I'm always interested in whatever you have to say.
Ah, that's too nice, too nice. But but thanks, Jim. I think if everybody got where he's coming from, I mean, the question indeed is who defines what is just, right? Or who draws the line? Who says it is just to blame the company? Even in corporate manslaughter laws, which are institutionalized in the UK for the last 20 years, something like that.
Don't look at me, I'm not.
But it was once the hope of the New View people. Oh, finally, the workers will get off the hook, right? Now, I think that each and every one for you in your organization can have this discussion. What you think is just. Because you import different cultures, different assumptions. And justice is one of those categories in human existence about which reasonable people will always disagree. All right? But remember one thing. That is, if you have one story of the accident, like the report that you wrote, and you say, this is the story, this is the truth, it turns everybody else into a liar. Right? And that's an extremely arrogant thing to say. Who says that you have the right story of the accident? In fact, and I would challenge Tim and say, well, yeah, we have 23 years later, even another story about Hillsborough. It's not the truth, it's yet another version. And it may be richer than other versions, but there's always perspectives, right? We can never have a point of view without having a point of view. I mean, you're standing somewhere, right? Yeah. So who gets to draw that line in your organization? I think in the West, in Denmark, on the North Sea shelf, there is no excuse not to have that democratically verankerd, is that what you say, verankerd? Right, democratically based. That is, you can actually have participation from your entire workforce and say, well, who should be on a committee that draws the line? And who helps create these groups? And so in organizations where it's just the management, the operational management that draws the line and says, you will be fired, it's awful. If it's just the OIM, it's really awful, right? And the really bad thing about that, Jim, which you know from experience, is it shuts up the safety discussion on your rig. And you are the dumber for it, right?
And people regard that as an unjust culture.
And people regard that definitely as an unjust culture, yes, yes, absolutely. And if it's unjust, they will shut up. Yeah.
Great. We're coming towards the end of the session, I'm afraid, but we have questions. I'd like to take 2 or 3 more if I could. There's a gentleman here, purple shirt.
Yes, Gil Garay from Force Technology. I'm engaged in conducting incident investigations, mainly in the US, Canada, and now in Brazil. When I get bored, I read your books, and I learned a lot. The issue is, based on my experience, I've seen companies saying that they have world-class safety and that they are just showing statistics and figures and LTIs and ensuring by all means that prognosis and predictions about safety are according to their vision, and sending notebooks to hospitals to ensure that the figures are the right ones. And if it doesn't happen that way, they are tweaking here and tweaking there just to ensure everything looks like the prognosis says. The other thing is that based on investigations, and apart from that, many companies, they like very much this godlike attitude that now I'm analyzing things with all this knowledge, and I don't care if the guys involved in the incident, they had the knowledge at that time. I know the mistakes, I know how they fail, and okay, I have the root causes or whatever I found to just identify remedial actions and corrections. But the issue is that after a while, and a while could be a couple of years, 4 years, 3 years, companies simply forget everything about investigations. And it's like they have a learning disability. They don't want to learn. Because you can see in shipping, in the oil industry, in safety critical domains, that you have nearly over and over and over again the same kind of accidents, and committed exactly following the same mistakes, the same events. So we are not only not learning from similar companies, we are not learning from our own issues. And this learning disability, I think, the driver is that it's all about who's going to pay, compensation, the next person that's going to be fired, and to keep my job. And that is the real end. So the findings of the investigations, the remedial actions, the root causes, yeah, we like it. They look very nice. They are exactly the things we were looking for. Now we're going to implement them. But the issue is that I can tell you, based only on my experience, that 4 years later, nothing is remembered in the company. Nothing's been implemented. And they go through the same issues again over and over and over.
Okay,
So my question is, and it's the easy one.
It's Brazil. Plenty of time. Come on.
Okay. My question is, how can you change that? It's the easy one.
Muy obrigado.
De nada.
Obrigado. If there was an easy answer to that, Tim would have found it, and he would be making a lot of money. But he hasn't.
Don't stand so close to the edge, you can fall.
No, but we're facetious. I think you can't say learning disability. Yes, learning disability, nice way of putting it. But they come in large variations. Some organizations are pathologically disabled when it comes to learning. Others are a bit more on the ball. And there are things that you can immediately change. One of the things that, if I was visiting a site on the way here, and the discussion we had was the number of investigations that ended in recommendations only at the governance and behavioral intervention level, right? basically saying, stare harder, intervene more aggressively, watch out, you idiot, right? In sort of nice language, right? But that's basically what the recommendations say. Well, implementing that, you can't measure the effect, you can't, and it will repeat itself. I think one of the ways to overcome the learning disability is to begin to look at how many of the recommendations address things upstream, right? But upstream organizationally. In the design phase, right? Lots of safety to be gained there. I was in Singapore. I mean, well, when you live in Australia, you're in Singapore a lot because you've got a tank up somewhere. And so lots of green buildings, just a very short example. I think it's beautiful. Lots of green buildings, Tim. And so one of the HSC problems that they had was so the buildings have this is middle of the tropics, lots of greenery on the outside, which needs maintenance, right? So you got people dangling, working at heights, very dangerous, plop. What they did in this particular building was they designed it out. They said, what we'll do is we'll make a revolvable 180-degree wall. So you can turn the wall to the inside. And then you maintain it and turn it back to the outside. So people don't have to wear harnesses, no HSC challenges, nothing, right? So all this governance and behavioral intervention nonsense is ruled out at the design stage. That to me is not a learning disability. That to me is very strong evidence, right, that we're picking some things up. But you have to move up the ladder, all right? And the final thing I think that I do want to comment on relative to this is I think learning disabilities are entrenched in the industry as long as we keep paying safety bonuses for the wrong thing. If we keep paying safety bonuses for the absence of negatives, we will not learn. We have to start paying, if you want to pay bonuses at all, I think it's a bad idea, but if that's what you do, find smarter things to latch them onto, all right? Okay.
I mean, my answer would be quite simply that, the truest thing ever said is you get the level of safety that the people in charge are comfortable with, no more, no less, and everything is designed to produce that. At some organizations, high reliability organizations don't have any accidents at all, it seems, because that's what they want. And I don't want to take a leaf out of Sydney's book. A lot of the stuff that we do is just bullshit. It just makes us feel better. And we don't learn because we don't really want to learn. Yeah, unless I'm an individual who's responsible for burying somebody that I've killed, in which case I learn from that. So often you see organizations that push forward when they've killed someone.
One final little tale, and that is different contractors. Again, Jim, how many contractors? So 74% contractors. How many would that be? 20, 40, 60 contractors? Yeah, no, in the percentage, but how many contractor organizations? Okay. Typically, the variation in their just cultures is huge, right? You've got some who are pretty mature, they can learn. Others are very, they come to Chevron and say to you, oh, Jim, no, we have this guy, he screwed this up, but he's already has a window seat on the way back, so we dealt with the problem. He's gone, right? Now, then you should, and you probably do go, oh my God, that's not a very constructive response, right? But one contractor that I know pays their people $50 if they're willing at the toolbox meeting to stand up and say, okay, I'm going to tell you how I screwed this up, right? And they share it with their workmates. And those stories are told, well, okay, there may be the 4-year or the 2-year or there's turnover and everything, but those stories have a resonance, right, through time that if they're good enough, they do get told and retold. So learning is always imperfect. Right? I'm just looking at my 9, 11, and 13-year-old, right? Very imperfect learning, but, and myself. But there are ways to enhance it, right? So what behavior do we reward? Right?
Okay. We're on time, but you've got a question, so please, the last question of the day.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tim. That's
or
putting the pressure on in the pretty corner of the room. You asked the question, are we rewarding the wrong stuff? Nicola Gordon from Shell, by the way. Are we rewarding the wrong stuff? Are we drowning in KPIs? And I'm really humbled by the difficulty of how to do this, because there's so many risks are taken, but they don't turn into an incident. We want to make really sure that we don't reward any of that. Risks that
you'll stop making money very quickly.
Yeah, exactly. And risks that are not seen, they're just not perceived. How about that? And from my own experience having been an asset manager, when we were running a scheme about keeping the platform, the more days that we had without a shutdown, there was a reward for everybody. And that was seen as a very unifying thing, and it got us in the right direction. But sooner or later, in one of the other assets, there was an accident where a contributory factor was people trying to make sure that the platform didn't shut down.
Yeah.
And then I had an OIM actually in tears, which is not something that happens much. But he's saying, you know, in the mornings I would come out of bed and go and ask the team, you know, how were things last night? No shutdowns. And they would, if it was okay, he never asked. And he said, I didn't ask, he said. And I knew that I could have asked, and actually that I should have asked. Because some nights the plant should have shut down, and he knew that in his heart, but he wasn't able in that situation to do that. And that stays with me, because it makes me think about what can the people around me say. And I want us just to be really, really curious about what is actually happening out there, not what the system ought to be doing, but what's under it, and what is it trying to tell us, and creating the space for that to happen.
Absolutely.
The safest way is these micro experiments, is to start small. I mean, we had already the example of writing a report or the information to get the contract and not having any of the negatives in there, and you still get the contract. In fact, you get 3 out of 4. Right? That is experimenting on a small scale. Start small, see how it works, and then, you know, draw back if it doesn't work out. Learn.
Okay, I mean, the short answer is you don't reward the result, you reward the things that get you the result. That's all. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Sidney Dekker, Dr. John Thorogood.
And Tim Marsh.
Okay. Good, John. Good.